prosecutions. We talked about the actus reus. Now we have the mens rea, and that is the intent. And the obstruction of justice is a specific intent offense. So when Michael Warnock comes in to this meeting red hot and references the Prime Minister on more than one occasion being adamant that he is going to find a solution one way or another, is indicative of intent. That is the only plausible legal definition of what the Prime Minister had instructed Michael Warnock to do. Now, Michael Warnock testified and would have everyone believe, as nonsensical as this is, that he took it upon his own self to initiate the meeting. And he was not directed by the Prime Minister in any which way or form to, again, put that final element of pressure on her, which is just preposterous. No one believes that. He lied. So when I take a look from a former prosecutor's perspective, the charge of obstruction of justice, I'm mindful of the case law that exists in this particular area, and I can't remember the name of the case, but it came out of the Supreme Court of Canada, which set out the essential elements to the offense of obstruction, and it made it abundantly clear that success to the obstruction is not necessary. An attempt is all that is necessary. And that's exactly what we had in this particular case. Jody Wilson-Raybould held her own, maintained her position, never deviated from that position. Next thing you know, she's facing a cabinet shuffle. Again, a preposterous explanation offered by the Prime Minister and his government that it was because of the sudden resignation of Treasury Board President Scott Bryson. Was she the only high-profile minister that could have filled that role? I don't think so. No one believes that for a minute. She was demoted because she had the audacity to say no to Justin Trudeau. Take a look in history to all the MPs who've said no to Justin Trudeau, who proclaims that he is a feminist prime minister. Another blatant lie. Let's take a look at MP, I'm going to probably mispronounce her name. Is it Selena Chavez?
Selena Caesar Chavez.
Chavez, okay? Had great difficulty with the Prime Minister during her entire tenure. Ultimately felt that he was pressuring her in ways that she was completely uncomfortable with. Again, this feminist Prime Minister showed her the door, just like he ultimately showed our first Indigenous Attorney General. Had no difficulty as well with the excellent work that was done by Cabinet Minister Jane Philpott. I believe she was Minister of Health at the time. Her mistake, what was her crime? Her crime was supporting Jody Wilson-Raybould. Supporting her and suggesting that no, the Prime Minister was completely out of line. Absolutely out of line. She was shown the door. And then I remember, I wasn't a parliamentarian back then, but I remember how gleefully the Liberal government and its backbenchers were just gleefully clapping on television in front of all of Canada. Okay, and Mr. Baines is smiling as well, but he wasn't there. But maybe had he been there, he might have been smiling and clapping as well. But I said to myself, what are you so damn happy about? What are you smiling about, Justin Trudeau? You're Canada's first feminist Prime Minister. And here you are clapping like a seal to celebrate the demise of a very strong, too strong cabinet ministers who had the strength to say no to Justin Trudeau. That's what happens. That's what happens to Liberal MPs who have the audacity to challenge the almighty wisdom of Justin Trudeau. So you're right. I'm absolutely right to have these questions still percolating in my mind why the RCMP did not complete the task when the evidence was right there. I'm also mindful of the fact that Michael Warnock had shared with us not too long ago that this particular issue was never discussed at Cabinet. Wonder if people remember around this table that actual piece of evidence. It was never discussed at Cabinet, yet we heard from the RCMP Commissioner that his request for documents were blocked by Justin Trudeau and the government because of Cabinet confidences. Well, if there were no discussions at Cabinet, then there were no confidences. So that's another issue I need to raise with Commissioner Duhem this afternoon, because I didn't have that information available to me when he first attended. Why was it important for Commissioner Dion to interview 14 people? Literally anyone who had something to say about the SNC-Lavalin matter. But the RCMP, in their infinite wisdom, decided to limit that to 4 individuals. Can you say that that was a thorough investigation? I think not. And again, when I posed that question to them and their nonsensical response to it certainly didn't satisfy myself, and I'm sure didn't satisfy Canadians. And for those at this table who remember my final question to the Commissioner at that time, is I phrased it in such a way that you'll forgive me, Commissioner, when I say to you that your handling of this investigation can only lead to the inevitable conclusion that there exists a 2-tier level of justice in this country, particularly as it relates to Justin Trudeau. He, his deputy, and other members have responded to committees that no one is above the law, and that no one includes Justin Trudeau. And although no sitting Prime Minister has ever been charged with a criminal offense, the RCMP has left the door slightly ajar. And I don't have the actual verbiage, the words in front of me, but the report that I had access to when I questioned our current Attorney General at Committee of the Whole concluded that the RCMP would continue the investigation if they had access to further documents. I'm going to explore with the Commissioner what that means when he attends. We've already satisfied the issue regarding Cabinet confidences that obviously was not discussed. And what does it say to Canadians? What does it say to Canadians under investigation? Can they simply refuse to cooperate with law enforcement? Would they have the same ability to shut down an investigation like Justin Trudeau did by simply refusing to hand over documents? I think Justin Trudeau is the only Canadian in this country that has that ability. And apparently that's okay with the RCMP. I can tell you emphatically, Mr. Chair, that it's not okay to Canadians. Absolutely not. As I've indicated at the outset, the obstruction of justice charge is not a difficult prosecution. And I put this to the Commissioner that I've actually I've dealt with cases where the police have investigated a historical homicide, have put together thousands of pages of disclosure, a trial that literally took maybe a couple of years to start, a trial that may have lasted 30 or 45 days. I have personally completed far more serious prosecutions than an obstruction of justice charge. So it really begs the question, why did they delay for the years that they did, other than they had no political will to charge as sitting prime minister? Are they truly independent? Well, the RCMP Act may differ on that issue. Section 4 of the RCMP Act makes it abundantly clear that they report to the Minister of Public Safety. And it's the government that actually appoints the commissioner. Begs the question, how independent can you be under those circumstances? These are the questions I get from Canadians from across this country. These are the questions I get from my constituents. Now, I look at the time. I have many more thoughts in my mind on a multitude of other scandals, but I'm going to cede my time now to my colleague, Mr. Cooper. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brock. Continuing with the list on the motion, I have Mr. Cooper, Ms. Damoff, Mr. Green, Mr. Villeneuve, and then Mr. Turek has indicated he wants to speak. Mr. Cooper, go ahead, please.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I would make a few observations with respect to this motion that has been put forward by Mr. Green. First of all, this motion is not unique to this committee. This is part of a coordinated campaign between the Liberal government and their NDP coalition partner, in which, once again, the NDP is doing the bidding of the Liberals. We have a Prime Minister and a government that are in chaos. A government that is 20 points behind in the polls, a Prime Minister who is literally despised by Canadians, a government that has managed to screw up just about everything that they have touched over the past 9 years, from record deficits and debt that has led to 40-year high inflation, to high interest rates that have all created a cost of living crisis, to which these Liberals' response to the cost of living crisis that they created is to make life even less affordable for Canadians with carbon tax hikes, and now this latest tax hike on healthcare workers, specifically doctors, farmers, small businesses, and homeowners that they, home builders that they claim is a tax hike on the so-called super rich, when in fact everyday Canadians are going to pay, and pay dearly as a result. And on top of that, we have a government that is mired in scandal. In fact, it is arguable that this is the most corrupt government in modern Canadian history. And I saw one Liberal member thought that, thinks it's funny, but we have Dominic LeBlanc found guilty of breaching the Conflict of Interest Act. He's a senior minister in this government. We have Mary Ng, who's found guilty of breaching the Conflict of Interest Act. She's a senior minister in this government. We have Bill Morneau, who's found guilty of breaching multiple sections of the Conflict of Interest Act. He was the finance minister in this government. We have a former member of this committee, if you can believe it, who was found guilty, a Liberal member, who was found guilty of violating the Conflict of Interest Act. And then we have the Prime Minister himself, the first Prime Minister in Canadian history to be found guilty of violating the Conflict of Interest Act. And he was found guilty not once, but twice. And now we have the Minister from Edmonton, Mr. Boissonnault, who has so much to answer for, and I'm going to get into that momentarily. But we have a government that has a history of entitlement, patronage, and straight-up corruption. There is a culture of corruption embedded within this government. That's just established based upon the 9-year history of these Liberals. So in the face of all of these failings and all of the scandals and how frustrated and angry Canadians are at these Liberals, it's no wonder that they want to get out of town. They want to hide over the summer. They want to shut down the ability of parliamentary committees to provide appropriate oversight. And I'm not going to be a party to doing any of the bidding for these Liberals. There is a reason why we have 3 oversight committees that are chaired by the official opposition, Government Operations Committee, Public Accounts, and the Ethics Committee. And boy, all of these committees are working overtime in the face of all of the mismanagement and all of these Liberal scandals. And to say, well, simply bring forward a 1064, I say not good enough. Not good enough, because we've seen the NDP work with the Liberals to adjourn meetings, to prevent 1064 motions from being debated and voted on. So what is the rationale for this motion? The only rationale that I can see is that it's about doing the bidding for Justin Trudeau and the Liberals. There is a reason why, in the standing orders, the chair has the discretion to convene a meeting. I say leave it to the chair of this committee, a very good chair. And we have, and I do want to zero in on the matter that we were discussing earlier today, and that is the cloud of scandal that hangs over the Minister of Employment, Mr. Boissonnault. Yes, we are going to hopefully hear from his former business partners, Ms. Poon and Mr. Anderson, but I would submit that we can't wait until the fall before there's any further scrutiny undertaken by this committee of Mr. Boissonnault and the series of questionable activities that he has been connected with in relation to both Ms. Poon and Mr. Anderson. Let's look at what we're dealing with Mr. Boissonnault. We have a minister who had started up a company, a lobbying firm, after he lost his seat in the 2019 election. He got around, there was a loophole that allowed him to set up a company even though he couldn't lobby, and he hired Ms. Poon, who lobbied for his company. When he was returned to the House of Commons in 2021, he appropriately wound down that company. Ms. Poon took over, but Ms. Poon then set up her own lobbying firm that was lobbying this government, that was lobbying Minister Boissonnault's own department, and that had received $110 million in government contracts as Ms. Poon's company was paying Mr. Boissonnault. Mr. Boissonnault was not transparent. In fact, he attempted to hide his connection to Ms. Poon's lobbying firm by in the declaration that he made to the Ethics Commissioner, in which he hid behind the numbered company, not the name that the company or the lobbying firm, the company held itself out as. As a result, the Ethics Commissioner was unaware that the firm that was paying Mr. Boissonnault was lobbying his department and other departments within this government in securing contracts. Mr. Boissonnault said, well, there's nothing to see here because the payments that he was receiving from Ms. Poon's lobbying company were in relation to accounts receivable from work that he did prior to his election, except for the fact that he never did any work for Ms. Poon's company. So why is he being paid by Ms. Poon's company, a company he did no work for, a company that was lobbying his department, that was that was benefiting handsomely in securing $110 million in contracts? Mr. Boissonnault has provided no explanation for why he was being paid by Ms. Poon's company. It doesn't add up. We need to probe that. We also need to understand why it is that, you know, Mr. Boissonnault hid behind a numbered company. Why was he not transparent? Was it just a sloppiness on his part? Now, he says that he was cleared by the Ethics Commissioner. He hasn't been cleared by the Ethics Commissioner. And when he was asked about whether he's been cleared by the Lobbying Commissioner, as far as I understand, it's on the Lobbying Commissioner's radar, this issue. So there are many questions to be asked of Mr. Boissonnault in regards to what is, at the very least, a very questionable arrangement of having one's business partner lobby the department of the minister who's connected to that individual who's being paid by that company as that company is securing money from the federal government for clients. But then there is the issue around Global Health Imports Corporation and the question of where's Randy? Who is Randy? This is a company that Mr. Boissonnault set up just at the beginning of the pandemic. He had no experience in the PPE business, neither did Mr. Anderson, whose career was that of a hockey coach. But amazingly, they set up this company right at the time of the pandemic and began to secure millions of dollars in government contracts for PPE. Raises some questions about how they managed to pull that off. Experts and those familiar with the industry said that it's almost impossible for essentially a two-person company with no track record, no experience, to suddenly start up a company and secure millions of dollars in this area. But I digress. Needless to say, all has not gone well at Global Health Imports Corporation. Mr. Boissonnault held himself out, as he confirmed when he appeared before this committee, as a business, as a partner at Global Health Imports with Mr. Anderson. Global Health Imports did not appear, well, I shouldn't say didn't appear because there were judgments to back it up, did not operate as, as a good business, an ethical business. This is a company that has been hit with $7.8 million in judgments by Alberta courts for ripping off clients. $7.8 million in judgments by Alberta courts in respect of a company that Mr. Boissonnault started, held himself out as a partner at, and continues to have a 50% ownership in. Now, what does that say? Before getting into what the bigger issue is involving Mr. Boissonnault, just on that basis, what does that say about the standard of ethics within this Liberal government? That Justin Trudeau has appointed a minister who was involved in a shady PPE company that, under questionable circumstances, secured government contracts that ripped off clients, that has essentially been found guilty by Alberta courts in the way of $7.8 million in judgments that have been awarded to those clients who were ripped off by Mr. Boissonnault's company, a company that he was engaged in and a partner in during some of the instances that led to, or business dealings that led to the lawsuits that resulted in the $7.8 million in judgments. The fact that there is a minister in this government that was involved in those kinds of shady business dealings, who has a 50% interest in a company that is on the hook in judgments in the amount of $7.8 million, I would think would be enough to say, Mr. Boissonnault, you're done. You're fired. You don't meet the standard, the ethical standard of serving in the federal cabinet. But again, Mr. Boissonnault is not an outlier in this government when it comes to ethical misconduct. As I said, Dominic LeBlanc, guilty. Mary guilty. Bill Morneau, guilty. Greg Fergus, guilty. Justin Trudeau, guilty twice. So Randy Boissonnault sort of fits into the culture of corruption that I alluded to, that is so embedded in a government that is frankly rotten to the core. Rotten to the core. But then, Mr. Boissonnault says, there's, he said, well, when the $7.8 million in judgments came to light, he said, well, those lawsuits arose after I left. Well, it turns out that's not true. He lied. He straight up lied. again, that's par for the course with these Liberals. That's the ethical standard of these Liberals. And then, the very day that Boissonnault was set to appear at this committee, where he was going to peddle the falsehood that he had been cleared by the ethics commissioner, Global News broke a story in which there were text messages from his then business partner at Global Health Imports, Anderson, of texts from Randy. Now, the text from Randy amounts to basically a shakedown of a client from California who is suing, another one of the many companies and those who've had the misfortune of doing business with Global Health Imports who have commenced a lawsuit for fraud against Global Health Imports. Global Health Imports, the context of his text message is that you have Randy Boissonnault writing to Anderson saying that the California-based client, the Gowie Group, better wire over what is equivalent to a $500,000 Canadian deposit for the purchase of PPE. According to the Gowie Group, and there are records of it, they transferred the $500,000 to Mr. Boissonnault and Mr. Anderson's company, and then the PPE never arrived. Global Health Imports just didn't deliver it. And then mysteriously, some might say not so mysteriously, the warehouse of Global Health Imports was burnt to the ground weeks after the $500,000 was wired over to Global Health Imports company. Burned to the ground. The Edmonton police have concluded that it was likely arson. One might wonder who was responsible for that arson. Global News reported that Anderson spoke about paying vendors after his company received insurance money. Just another coincidence. But so you have a minister that is involved in this very sketchy company. But what is really problematic, of course, about this text from Randy is that if it in fact is Mr. Boissonnault, and there's every reason to believe it is, it means that the minister was engaged in, participated in, a $500,000 fraud. But not only that, Mr. Boissonnault was a minister of the Crown on the date of the text messages and when this fraudulent transaction occurred that Global Health Imports orchestrated and Anderson orchestrated. Now, what is at issue there? Well, very simply, it is a blatant violation of the Conflict of Interest Act for a minister to be involved in the operations of a business, of any business. Mr. Boissonnault can retain ownership, but he cannot be involved in the operation of the business. So it's a straight-up contravention of the Conflict of Interest Act, but again, he would join the club. He would join the club of Dominic LeBlanc, Mary Ying, Bill Morneau, Greg Fergus, and Justin Trudeau in breaching the Conflict of Interest Act. So when Global News reported on these text messages, Randy Boissonnault said, "It's not me. It's a different Randy." I said, "Mr. Boissonnault," when he came before this committee, I said, "Would it be fair to say this is a fairly small company with a handful of people?" And he said, he acknowledged that would be fair. And so I said, "Then who's Randy? Who is he?" He said, "I don't know who that Randy is." And he said it with a straight face. "I don't know who that Randy is." It would be laughable, it's farcical, if the matter were not as serious as it is when we're talking about a minister of the Crown who was potentially tied up in a $500,000 fraud and who violated the Conflict of Interest Act, potentially. If in fact, that Randy, if Randy, the minister, is the Randy in the text messages. Now, this really shouldn't be that hard to find Randy. It shouldn't be. Could there be another Randy? Well, if there is another Randy, then why can't, if not Mr. Boissonnault, identify him, and he should be able to identify him, why can't Anderson, Mr. Anderson, identify him? Anderson told Global News that it was a different Randy, that it was a Randy that was involved in the logistics of the company. But when Global News looked into who was responsible for logistics, it turns out it's not someone named Randy.
Whoops.
It's someone entirely different.
His father.
One could say it's highly suspicious. And
It was his father.
it was the father. And in fact, it wasn't just anyone. It was Anderson's father who was responsible for logistics, not Randy, not a Randy. And then he couldn't verify. Global News said, "Well, what's the last name of Randy, of this Randy?" And he couldn't say. He didn't know. I mean, this is a guy who's supposedly involved in logistics, one of the key people in his company, and he can't cite his last name. But trust him. It's this Randy, this mysterious Randy without a last name. Give me a break.
It's like Prince.
Yeah, and then okay. And so how does that add up? So Global News can't find this Randy. Anderson can't remember his last name. Randy Boissonnault can't be bothered, evidently, to pick up the phone, text Anderson. I mean, he seems to have been quite comfortable texting Anderson, but all of a sudden he can't text Anderson to say, "Who is this Randy? I need to clear the air." Could Anderson not pour over all of the employment records of the 5 people that work at the company to find this mysterious Randy? It is, and then Boissonnault said, "Well, I'm going to turn over. I've turned over my phone records." He went to this committee. He actually stood in the House and said he had turned over his phone records to the committee. Turns out, another lie from Randy.
We all confirmed it.
Another lie from Randy. He didn't turn over his phone records. He turned over one device. What a coincidence. How convenient. You know, some of this is almost funny, but again, I underscore it really isn't funny. It isn't funny at all when we're dealing with allegations around a $500,000 fraud, the potential that a minister of the Crown violated the Conflict of Interest Act, and is playing Canadians for fools, as if Canadians are foolish, as if everyone are idiots. I mean, no one is fooled by this. No one is. Everyone knows that the Randy in the text messages, the Randy involved in the $500,000 fraud, is the same Randy who sits as a minister in Justin Trudeau's cabinet, and his name is Randy Boissonnault.
Pull the Band-Aid off.
Everyone knows that. And it speaks to how little respect Justin Trudeau and his ministers have for Canadians, how little respect they have for the law. They think they're above the law. They think the law doesn't apply to them. Dominic LeBlanc didn't think it applied to him. Mary Ng didn't think it applied to her. Bill Morneau didn't think it applied to him. Greg Fergus didn't think it applied to him. Justin Trudeau didn't think it applied to him. And Randy Boissonnault doesn't think it applies to him. Mr. Chair, we need to get answers. When Mr. Boissonnault came before this committee, he didn't answer any real questions. He wasn't fully truthful. He, in some instances, lied outright. In other cases, he sort of gave no partial answers or non-answers, interrupted, all to avoid accountability. And it was not a pretty spectacle what this committee saw. But it was another example of how this government operates and the ministers in it. And so we need to keep probing. We need to continue to hold hearings. And yes, it's good. Yes, it's fine that this committee adopted a motion today to invite Mr. Anderson and Ms. Poon, who very conveniently have been supposedly unable or unavailable to attend at this committee until very conveniently the summer when they know that the House isn't sitting. But, you know, we've dealt with that. We have a motion. We passed it today. That's fine. But I don't think it should take, after that, a 106.4 to continue the probing on this very, very serious matter. A matter that if the Randy in the text messages isn't the same Randy who is the minister in Justin Trudeau's cabinet, the air would have been cleared long ago. And so I say we need to leave it to the chair. It's in the standing orders. If we need to have additional meetings this summer on the matter of Mr. Boissonnault, then we should do that. And we don't need to come here for a 106.4 to then schedule additional meetings. We can just simply keep it simple. Leave it to the discretion of the chair to call a meeting. Maybe we need to call Mr. Boissonnault back. We probably do, after we hear from Ms. Poon and Mr. Anderson. So let's provide the chair with the flexibility to do that. And we can continue to have conversations offline as these matters progress. And it's not, so that's the case of Mr. Boissonnault, but I go back to what I said at the beginning, that this is part of a coordinated effort by the Liberals to shut down the work of all committees. And there are several other committees that are holding hearings on Liberal corruption, including the $60 million Arrive scam at government operations, the Green Slush Fund at the Public Accounts Committee, a slush fund involving Liberal insiders who, under the watch of Navdeep Bains and the current minister, engaged in 186 conflicts in which board members funneled hundreds of millions of dollars to their own companies in some 76 cases, 63 cases involving $76 million. Board members at the Green Slush Fund actually voted to funnel money into their own companies. It's straight up conflicts, it's straight up corruption. The Public Accounts Committee has been holding hearings now that we have the benefit of the Auditor General's report, which made those findings, but it's no surprise that the Liberals want to shut down the work of the Public Accounts Committee over the summer as well. And I get it. I get it as to why they want to shut things down. They don't want to have to deal with all of these scandals that they have to somehow justify and defend. But I can't understand why the NDP would be a partner of the Liberals in this regard. I guess the reason is part of the fact that they're in a coalition with the Liberals, propping up the Liberals, and not only on matters of policy, but in terms of it covering up their corruption. Now, Mr. Chair, I think this committee, it's a very busy committee. It's a very busy committee after 9 years of Justin Trudeau. And Mr. Brock is going to be questioning this afternoon the commissioner of the RCMP on, among other things, the SNC-Lavalin scandal, another massive scandal involving this Prime Minister. It's a scandal that I'm quite familiar with because I sat on the Justice Committee when the Justice Committee held hearings on SNC, and we heard from Jody Wilson-Raybould, who appeared at our committee in the spring of 2019 in what was truly a historic day, and historic and not in a good way, but when she came before the committee and she spoke about all of the times that she was pressured by Justin Trudeau and those around him, including Mr. Wernick, the clerk of Justin Trudeau's personal department, the PCO, as well as Katie Telford, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, Gerald Butts, the Prime Minister's then Principal Secretary. She was repeatedly pressured to interfere in the criminal prosecution of SNC-Lavalin, and she laid that out in detail. And the RCMP did launch an investigation into what happened during SNC, and Mr. Brock detailed the fact that it took them 5 years, and then they, for reasons that are not fully understood, shut down that investigation, an investigation that, among other things, looked into whether the Prime Minister obstructed justice. Now, one of the things that is important to understand about the RCMP's investigation into Justin Trudeau is that the investigation was obstructed by Justin Trudeau. And that was confirmed when the RCMP came before this committee, including the RCMP officer who headed the investigation. And how the Prime Minister has obstructed the RCMP investigation was by hiding behind cabinet confidence in refusing to turn over key documents to the RCMP, documents that the RCMP had requested be turned over to them, and the RCMP determined or requested those documents because the RCMP determined that they were absolutely material to determining whether, in fact, the Prime Minister obstructed justice. Now, to provide a little bit of background on what the RCMP requested and the Prime Minister refusing to turn over the documents, and how and what the Prime Minister did turn over versus what he didn't turn over, you have to go back to the spring of 2019. And you have to go back to before Jody Wilson-Raybould came before committee. She essentially had a gag that had been placed over her by the Prime Minister, and at the time having to do with cabinet confidence. So she said, look, there's a lot I'd like to talk about in terms of what went on behind closed doors, but I can't because of cabinet confidence. And I can remember the day that Bill Morneau brought down the budget in 2019. We shouted him out, let her speak. Let her speak. Take the gag off Jody Wilson-Raybould. Well, in the face of significant political pressure, the Prime Minister partially, and I did, but not fully. Prime Minister lifted or waived cabinet confidence up until Jody Wilson-Raybould was shuffled out as the Minister of Justice. What she could not reveal, what cabinet confidence has not been lifted, is what happened from the time that she was shuffled out of the portfolio of Minister of Justice and Attorney General to the time that she was fired from cabinet altogether by Justin Trudeau. Why does that matter? Well, according to the RCMP, when they appeared before this committee, the strongest theory that the Prime Minister obstructed justice was that he removed Jody Wilson-Raybould as Attorney General and installed a new Attorney General because that new Attorney General would make a different decision than Jody Wilson-Raybould. In other words, the new Attorney General would do the Prime Minister's bidding. That is what the RCMP said is the strongest theory on the question of whether the Prime Minister committed obstruction of justice, and it's why the RCMP requested cabinet documents during that period. And the RCMP did confirm at committee that, yes, that period is absolutely material to determining whether the Prime Minister obstructed justice. And the Prime Minister has consistently refused to lift cabinet confidence during that period. So what we have is a Prime Minister who is obstructing the RCMP investigation. Now, one can draw conclusions why. Jody Wilson-Raybould has said there are things that she said she would like to say, but she can't about that period. The RCMP says all of that evidence is material to getting to what is the strongest theory that the Prime Minister obstructed justice. And could it be that the Prime Minister is hiding behind cabinet confidence because there's evidence, strong evidence, that he obstructed justice? I would submit or suggest that that is the case. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that the Prime Minister, if he didn't cross the line of obstructing justice, he came right up to the line in sort of the best case scenario for the Prime Minister.
Chair?
Go ahead on your point of order.
Thank you very much. I hate to interrupt, but can you let the committee know what resources? I understand we have resources to 1:30 or
1:12 today.
1:12?
Yeah, so we have maximum of 2 hours. The meeting started at 11:02. We suspended for 10 minutes, and that brings us to 1:12.
There's no way of getting more, so Mr. Cooper can continue?
I'm not sure, because the instructions that I have were maximum 2 hours today. So,
Okay.
hold on. We have till 1:12, Mr. Fisher. Okay, thank you. Mr. Cooper, you have the floor. Continue, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. As I was saying, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to conclude that either the Prime Minister obstructed justice, or in a best case scenario for him, and it's not a very good scenario, but he came right up to the line of obstructing justice in pressuring repeatedly what amounted to a coordinated campaign for Jody Wilson-Raybould to interfere in the decision, in prosecution of SNC-Lavalin, a decision that had been made independently by the Director of Public Prosecutions. The Prime Minister would not take no for an answer. And when it came to the conclusion that she would not budge, she was going to stand up to the Prime Minister and stand up for the rule of law, he fired her. And then he covered up, and is now covering up, the evidence that the RCMP says it needs to complete their investigation. As I said, if the Prime Minister didn't obstruct justice, he came right up to the line, and I would emphasize in that regard that no matter how you look at it, Justin Trudeau doesn't come off favorably in this. He may very well have broken the law, a criminal code, serious offense under the criminal code, But at the very least, he engaged in behavior that was completely unethical. He engaged in behavior that fits by every definition corruption. But it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that there is this culture of corruption within this government. And it starts at the top. The corruption starts at the top, and it starts with the Prime Minister. I have no doubt that the culture that we have seen is a direct result of what the standard that he has set. That the Conflict of Interest Act doesn't apply to me. That I'm, as the all-powerful Prime Minister, going to put pressure on my Attorney General to interfere in a prosecution, but I don't think should go forward, notwithstanding that the Director of Public Prosecutions made the independent determination that that prosecution ought to go forward. That I'm going to fire my Attorney General when she stands up for the rule of law, and I can get away with it because I'll just cover it up, just hide behind cabinet confidence. And, my colleague Mr. Brock talked about Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott when they were kicked out of the Liberal caucus. Justin Trudeau invited the media to come. They found out, I think, basically through the media.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead on your...
I know it's 1:11 and you're going to get ready to gavel down, but I would request that you suspend the meeting rather than adjourn it, just like we did last time we didn't finish debate, so we can get to a vote at the next meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that. Go ahead, Mr. Cooper.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Justin Trudeau invited the media to watch the spectacle of Liberal MPs who, as Mr. Brock said, acted like trained seals and gleefully cheered on the Prime Minister, cheered on the Prime Minister's corruption.
Okay, Mr. Cooper, I'm going to have to cut you off there because we have reached the maximum of our resources. The challenge, Mr. Fisher, with that is if I suspend and we don't have a meeting on Thursday, then that suspension carries over to the summer, and that provides all kinds of difficulties for the committee and me as the chair. So the meeting is adjourned.